A bunch of tourists have been able to, but I think Copacabana is even more. Yeah.
Deu certo?
Vocês vão transmitir.
Foi?
Fazendo streaming.
Ok. Boa tarde, todos e todas. Good afternoon. My name is Bruno Schafer. I'm a professor here at Political Science at IESP. Today we're glad to host the workshop Democracy in the 21st Century, Challenges and Pathways in Comparative Perspective, with the participation of Wolfgang Muno and Christoph Mohamad-Klotzbach. I hope that I say it correctly. The workshop goal is to discuss, as the name says, the concept of democracy from a comparative perspective, in a special way, the challenge posed by autocratization and populism. So, Dr. Wolfgang Muno is chair of comparative politics at the University of Rostock. Previously, he was a senior lecturer at the University of Mainz, professor of international relations and comparative political systems at the University of Landau, and professor for political science at the William Brandt School. Yeah? Yeah. He was also a visiting scholar in Canada, China, Argentina, USA, and a guest lecturer in India, Poland, Norway, Sweden, UK, Spain, and now Brazil. So his late publications are about autocratization, populism, public administration, and democracy. Dr. Christoph Mohamad-Klotzbach, member of the Institute of Political Science and Sociology at the University of Würzburg. He's also a PhD from the same university. Member of the Fabrics of Democracy Network and editor-in-chief of the
managing editor and
managing
part of the editorial team.
Oh, okay, of the German Journal of Comparative Politics. So this workshop will not be possible without the support of our political science program here at IESP. I thank our coordinator, Professor Sam Assunção. I also thank Professor Fabiano Santos, who made the first contact with Christoph and Wolfgang, and is the coordinator of the OLB, Observatório do Legislativo Brasileiro.
With John Fez.
With John Fez, Professor John Fez. Yeah. Our workshop will function as first we have Wolfgang and Christoph presentations, about 30 minutes each. Yeah.
That's right.
Okay. And then we open for the questions, and I will start with some comments and then pass on to the audience. So, se alguém tiver pergunta em português, pode fazer em português que a gente traduz aqui, sem problemas. Okay? Thank you, Christoph. Thank you, Wolfgang. We can now start.
Muito obrigado, Bruno. Thank you very much for this invitation. I will start standing up. I don't like sitting around here so much. Yeah, I'm sorry that I don't speak Portuguese. I will try to. Isn't it on?
Let me see.
Yeah, now it is on.
Yeah.
So I have to do this in English, unfortunately not in Portuguese, but well, whenever you have any question, feel free to interrupt me also, but if we have a discussion after that, that's fine. I will concentrate more on challenges, and perhaps Christoph will shed light on a few pathways he will present us. However, yeah, I was presented. I will concentrate first on the point of democratic backsliding and populism. Then I will tell you a little bit about populism in Europe. And then I will focus more on a case study, which is populism in Germany, the alternative for Germany. I also work on Latin America, but this means bringing olds to Athens. So I thought I concentrate on Europe and Germany with this thing. The background here we start is the challenge for democracy. If we take a look at democracy measurements, whether Freedom House or or VDEM, they all say, maybe we could say the 20th century was a century of democracy, where we had an expansion of democracy in many countries. But in recent years, there has been a break, and democracy has been going down in the last years. VDEM is talking of defiance in the face of autocratization, that advances in global levels of democracy made over the last 35 years have been wiped out, and there have been drastic changes in the last 10 years. That's from the recent VDEM report, the Varieties of Democracy project in Gothenburg, where they do a very sophisticated way of measuring democracy. And we see also here the curves going down a little bit in recent years. So this is related to autocratization, means democratic breakdown, but also democratic backsliding. And Milan Svolik has recently made a very nice graph showing that the way of how democracies die, let's put it this way, has changed. While in the 20th century, we very often saw military coups and as a usual way of ending democracy, in the last years, what Milan Svolik called executive takeovers has been rising. As we see, there's a trend line showing clearly that executive takeovers are now the way of ending democracy or undermining democracy, because this is related to democratic breakdowns, and it's not necessarily democratic breakdown, it also can be democratic backsliding. It depends on the extent of the way. So this is the most prevalent form of democratic breakdown, but also it's very important for the erosion of democracy by incumbents or regression of democracy, because democratic backsliding does not necessarily lead to democratic breakdown. There's a variance, and it can lead to democratic breakdown, but it also can mean a deterioration of democratic quality. It depends on the context, as we will see, and also on resistance in somehow. Democratic backsliding is happening in 3 dimensions. That's what literature like Nancy Bermeo and others collected. It's on one side the executive aggrandizement, which means executive the other microphone. Let's change cases. So tell me if it's better now. They also try to limit independent press. They try to limit the opposition. Let's say if it's in parliament, there's an opposition. There are not many, there may not be open fraud, but there may be manipulation. That's what they say of elections in beforehand, that state or the government is using state subsidies for their positions and limiting the possibility of opposition to have access to media, things like that. That's the elections manipulation, what is happening. And we have a third dimension, which is civil rights deterioration. As we clearly have seen, for example, women's rights in the United States or in Poland have been more or less, abortion rights have been abolished in Poland by the government. Also, many rights of LGBTQ+ communities or other minorities have been limited severely. And also freedom of opinion, sometimes freedom of assembly also has been limited by some incumbents. And as I said, this can on one hand lead only to a diminishing or a reduction of democratic quality, but it can also lead to complete democratic breakdown. That's what we have studied, for example, in an edited volume in German. We have made a short compilation in English version in order to get a wider audience, where we had compared Venezuela, United States, Hungary, and India, showing that in all these incidents, we have seen populists coming into power by free democratic elections and then starting this democratic backsliding. but to a different way. Let's say we skip a little bit. Yeah, let's start with this in a different way. Venezuela and Hungary clearly have crossed the line of democracy. Also, Hungary is nowadays, by many observers, called an electoral autocracy under many respects. We can discuss this later. Perhaps Venezuela, obviously the same. In India and the United States, there has been much more resistance, which is due to institutional context factors like federalism, but also the judiciary, which is in a different way. Changing of constitution is much more difficult in Hungary. Orban could change the constitution with a supermajority in the parliament without any resistance, and he also could override the free press very easily, while in India and in the United States, this showed to be much more difficult. So here, the extent of democratic backsliding was so far limited. India is still going on, and Donald Trump is trying to make a comeback in order to finish his task, which he could not finish in his first term. We will see what will happen in the United States. Maybe he will continue with the democratic backsliding and be much more successful. This is also a possibility. What is interestingly is all these four cases are examples also of populism. And we define, there are several approaches to populism, several theoretical debates, the strategic approach, cultural approach, and we followed the ideological approach, which was represented by Karl Müller. I think he was here also giving a presentation, a very great researcher and colleague from the Netherlands working in the United States. And his definition of populism is an ideology which sees societies as split in two homogeneous and antagonistic groups, the true people versus a corrupt elite. And second criteria, believes politics should be an expression of the volonté générale of the people. We could add that he conceptualized populism as a thin ideology which aligns with other ideologies. I think this is something he might have also presented here when he was here. So we have left populism and right populism in different ways. And that's what we also try to show here with our case, Venezuela as an example of left-wing populism, Orban, Trump, right-wing populism, Modi, kind of right-wing religious populism with the ethno-Hinduistic nationalism thing. We try to derive kind of a logic of populist governance because there's a big debate about the relationship of populism and democracy, as Müller and Rovira Kaltwasser wrote the book Threat or Corrective, and we thought that it might be a corrective if it's only an opposition movement relating to some problems of democracy, but if populists come to power, then it's very often, or usually it becomes a threat for democracy because of this logic of populist governments. You start with competitive elections, and if you have electoral success, you are legitimized because you represent the true people, the honest people. You represent the volonté générale, the true will of the people. That means the opposition is not a legitimate opposition anymore. These guys are now enemies of the people or traitors. So, and this legitimizes the anti-pluralism of populists, which they use in political communication, delegitimizing the opposition. They also legitimize measures against the opposition, as just explained with a democratic backsliding approach, that there are possibilities of having, I don't know, party funding or even meeting, or opposition politicians have to face judicial trials because of corruption scandals or whatever are made up. And an important element is also state capture, which means that positions in the state bureaucracy are filled by loyal followers who follow the government and also try to eliminate opposition influence, which in the end leads to democratic backsliding. And as mentioned, if the context is not strong enough to resist, then it might lead to autocratization. So even if we find also in many populist movements, especially in Latin America, but also the left-wing movement, for example, Podemos in Spain or Syriza in Greece, they claim to be more inclusive and try to do social policy for some people. Even if you find these inclusionary elements, then populism is at least ambivalent, because also these populist movements have included the anti-pluralist stance in their genetics, as we would say. So this is a big challenge, and we see exactly not only populist countries autocratized in the last years, but many of the populist countries. Also here, Brazil is also mentioned, Turkey with Erdogan, Poland under the peace government. The government recently lost elections, still the biggest party, the strongest party in Poland, but without a majority. But still they are in government, and we will see how it works, the transition to a new government, if this really works. So this is the framing on the idea of democratic backsliding and populism. And if we take a look at populism in Europe, we have many different populists. Here I have included one left-wing populist, Mélenchon from France, from La France Insoumise, but also we have Austria, the Freedom Party, that's the head of the Sweden Democrats, Marine Le Pen, Viktor Orban, AfD, and this is Antonio Abascal from Vox, and Giorgia Meloni. Sometimes we had to discuss in the case of Meloni, for example, we discuss, is this neo-fascism or is it right-wing populism? But I do not talk about Meloni so much, so we can maybe later discuss about the relationship. But we have seen, just to show you the slide, which is unfortunately in German, but this is the number of votes of right-wing populist parties. We're concentrating now more on right-wing populist parties because they pose a bigger challenge. We have fewer left-wing populist movements in Europe, and they are not as successful apart from Syriza in Greece, but due to the Greek financial crisis, Syriza had very little room for maneuvers at that time, and they really had to adapt to the crisis management. So right-wing populist parties rose in the last decades, the number of votes, and they also participated in governments. This is also a crucial difference to Latin America, of course, or to America, let's say. Donald Trump won the elections and was president. In Europe, we have parliamentary systems with much more coalition governments. So we have right-wing populists being part of coalition governments. As we will see here, for example, we have right-wing parties governing alone, which is in Hungary. Fidesz had in the last elections a clear majority and is governing alone. In Poland, PiS, that was the election before the recent elections. So they could, because due to the electoral system, they could also govern because they had a majority in parliament, although only a bit more than 1/3 of the votes. We had, in Italy, we have a government composed of the Fratelli d'Italia, which is a neo-fascist party, together with Lega, which is clearly a right-wing populist party, and Forza Italia from Berlusconi, which is also a right-wing populist party. In Italy, we also have the Cinque Stelle movement, the Five Stars movement, which is, maybe it's a left-wing populist. At least it's not a right-wing populist party. We also have, for example, in Finland, the right-wing populist Real Finns. They are part of the coalition government at the moment. In Sweden, the Sweden Democrats, they support a minority government in Sweden, a conservative minority government. So they are not part of the government, but they influence the government. Also in several Eastern European countries, which I'm not really an expert for, so I do know exactly every country of that is important. In next year, we will have also elections in Austria, where the Freedom Party is currently in service, the strongest party, and might also be governing again. They have been governing twice already in Austria and try to influence it. And yesterday we had elections in the Netherlands, and this man, Geert Wilders, the Freedom Party, Partij voor de Vrijheid, who is strongly anti-Islam, anti-migration. He won the elections with more than 34 seats in 150 seat parliament in the Netherlands. Usually the Netherlands are very split with many multi-party government, coalition governments. We will see what will happen, but this was perceived as a shock election in Europe yesterday. Yeah, yesterday he doubled the votes and the seats. He more than doubled the seats, which was clearly a big victory. And he wants to govern now in the Netherlands, which is a key country in Europe. We will see what will happen. So far, and this is also the slide I've shown you from VDEM, where they said autocratizing countries in Europe. And we had Poland, Hungary, clearly. We also had Serbia and Greece. Serbia, I don't know exactly what's going on there, but we have a relationship between the populist governments and the autocratizing countries in Europe. And we will see that this will go on. Let's now dig a little bit deeper into the case of Germany, where we also have a right-wing populist party, which is also campaigning against Islam, against migrants, yes, stop asylum. Yeah, they also relate immigration with security issues. All the immigrants are responsible for crime. Caveat, we have the lowest crime rate in the last 30 years in Germany, according to statistics, but that doesn't matter. People are afraid going onto the street in Germany, especially old people. They don't want to take public transportation anymore because they fear that migrants will rape them or steal their money or whatever, although this hardly ever happens in Germany. They also campaign for pork meat against the Islam immigration because Islam people don't eat pork, but they say that's our culture, we have to eat pork. What is interesting is that this party has been founded in 2013 by a group of neoliberal, Eurosceptic university professors, economists mainly, and they campaigned against the European integration and the euro, and they failed considerably in many aspects. In some Eastern European regions, our Bundesländer, our federal regions in East Germany, not Eastern European, in East Germany, they were quite successful, but mainly the big federal elections, they failed. European elections, they had quite a success, but in many aspects they were not really so successful. And then we had in 2015 a big refugee crisis in Europe, many immigrants coming from the Eastern Europe way. You might also have heard it in Brazil. I'm sure you know about that. And this was the big topic now for the AfD, and they changed their program. They are still anti-European, but that's not the focus anymore. And now they are focused against migrants, especially Islam immigrants. And they constantly moved more to the right. They changed several times the party leaders. They became too moderate, and always they moved to the right. And they achieved more and more electoral success and are now biggest opposition parties in several countries. Especially in East Germany, we see a striking bigger success compared to West Germany, while in the beginning, they achieved only 31.8 percentage points more in East Germany than in West Germany. The latest national elections, they had more than 150% more votes in East Germany than in West Germany. So it is a whole phenomenon which is in the whole Germany, but they are really much more successful in East Germany. As we can see here, the last federal elections, and the blue color is the party color of the Alternative for Germany, and that's where they were the strongest party. We have two votes in our voting system. First vote is voting for a direct representative in the parliament. Second, for a party list. And this is where the AfD, the blue color, where the AfD has become the strongest party in several regions.
The red is?
Red is Social Democrats, black is Christian Democrats, and then we have a few green spots. These are the Greens. Yeah. So it's clearly where Catholics live, it's still Christian Democrats. In the rest of the country, it's the Social Democrats. And in East Germany, you have many regions where the right-wing populist Alternative for Germany is the strongest party. And these are the latest surveys from this month, from yesterday actually, the actual surveys, that's their potential if there would be elections. They're now on more than 20% if there would be federal election. It's a survey only, we know that, on average, you see here in, that's Berlin, where big city, they're not so good, but in the rest they have more than 30%, they would receive more than 30% at the moment if there would have been elections. In West Germany, between 10 and 20%. So the big question for us is, why do people vote for AfD? Why? And there are two explanations. One is focusing on socio-economic factors, the other on political, cultural factors. So we could say one is about objective material conditions, the other is about subjective conditions. Some socio-economic factors is a big demographic change which happened in Eastern Germany. With the unification, millions of young people left East Germany in order to get good jobs in West Germany. And this meant that many areas in East Germany, where we are here, are rather deserted. Only old people live there. Here we can see Germany's east is shrinking. The red color means that these regions are losing people, and the people are older and older. And the more blue, you have internal migration and young people coming there looking for jobs. Gray means no change at all. That's a prognosis for until 2035, how Germany will develop. And that means that many small villages in East Germany, there are only a few old people left, which poses serious challenges to public transportation, health service, also education. If there are very few children anymore, schools have to close, and then the people are frustrated, everything is closing. Shops are closing, supermarkets are closing because there are not enough people anymore, and then everything is closing and nothing is going on anymore in many of these regions. That's very important as one explanation. We also see a slightly higher unemployment rate here in many areas of East Germany. Southern Germany, almost no unemployment anymore. In some areas, yeah, but you see the darker color, that means more unemployment in East Germany. And this is the disposable income in Germany. The darker the color, the more disposable income, that's here. And the lighter, that's here, the less disposable income. And that's what the people feel, obviously. We also have surveys finding out what about the political and economic elite and also the cultural elite. This is the numbers of university presidents. In total, we have around 106. We have 106 universities, 106 university presidents. University presidents born in East Germany, 0, not 1. Even outside of Germany, we had 4 in 2019. Even we in Rostock have now someone who was born in the United States. So these are the East Germans in top positions. The survey is some years old, but it hasn't changed much. In law, for example, higher law, no East Germans had positions in the Supreme Courts in Germany, in the economy. So in total, we see a strong underrepresentation. And that's a big debate also in the media. That's not that it's just there. So the media always debates and says, oh, here, we East Germans, we are not represented in the elite. So we have some real objective factors, less income, less good economic situation, less influence in economic and political and cultural elites. but mainly a big factor are the subjective factors. This is unfortunately in German, but it's easy to explain. This was the question is, did people in East Germany were treated unfair after unification of Germany? And even 51% of people in West Germany say, yeah, East Germans were treated unfair, but 77% of East Germans say, we were treated unfair with all this unification process. Yeah, we lost our jobs, our children went to West Germany, especially young, well-educated women left East Germany. So only less educated men were left alone in East Germany, which is also part of the explanation who votes and why people vote for the alternative for AfD. This is the population share of immigrants some years ago, but it hasn't changed a lot. You see where the darker the color, the more immigrants live there, and here hardly any immigrants live there. This has also a historical tradition in the former German Democratic Republic, the GDR. Hardly any immigrants lived there, and there was no contact with the population. That was not allowed. Immigrant workers from Angola or Vietnam were not allowed to have contact with the local population. If they were caught, they were sent back immediately. They lived in concentrated. That was from in the whole German Democratic Republic time from 1949 until 1989. Yeah, so that was not allowed. So people did not have really, until today, people have rarely any contact with foreigners, with immigrants, with refugees. So can Germany cope with refugees? A few years ago in West Germany, yeah, 2/3 of the population said, yeah, we can manage that. 1/3 said no. But in East Germany, it was almost par, saying, no, we cannot cope with refugees. And surveys here showing xenophobia and, So xenophobia and anti-Semitism, we see that apart from Bavaria, maybe Christoph can explain us a little bit more why Bavarians are so xenophobic and anti-Semitic. The East German region is really more xenophobic and anti-Semitic. The explanation is rather simple. It's the contact hypothesis. The less contact you have with foreign people, the more prejudices you have. And people have fear. They have prejudices. They fear foreigners. They don't want to have contact with them. They fear that they bring insecurity, violence, crime, which is not true statistically, but that's the discourse we see. That's the perception. And this leads to, I'm coming to the end, this leads to the conclusion, satisfaction with democracy. Are you satisfied with democracy? In the West, we have a slight majority, which is still satisfied with democracy, and not democracy as an abstract concept, but democracy the way it works in Germany today at the moment. And we see that almost 2/3 of East Germans are not satisfied with democracy the way it works today. So why, why, that's what we, yeah, okay, forget this. This is important. So we have a mix of socioeconomic conditions and political cultural conditions explaining us why people vote for the alternative for Germany. And many people, let's put it this way, that's enough. That's so we have on one hand, we do have convinced right-wing extremists. That's what we know from many surveys. People who are xenophobic, anti-Semitic, and they vote for a right-wing populist party because they represent all these issues. We also have people who just feel abandoned, not represented, not esteemed by the political elite, the established parties. And this is, some of my colleagues call them protest voters, but I'm not sure if this is really still protest voting, but this is just a deep frustration with politics, with democracy. And so they tend to vote for right-wing populists. And also we have people who just fear foreigners because of having prejudices. They fear the future, they fear changes, they fear losses. They have some wealth in Europe, and they fear that due to this big migration, demographic changes, economic changes, cultural changes nowadays, everything might lose. And what we see is clearly that people who have less trust, less social capital, they also tend to vote more for right-wing populist parties. And I think this is also a very good explanation. I've been working many years on Argentina, and this is clearly also a good explanation for why not. The big difference with Latin America is xenophobia does not play an important role. It's more the socioeconomic factors, but also the perception of being abandoned, not represented, not esteemed, losing trust in democracy, in parties and how it works. And then also I would say this is a big part of the explanation for Javier Milei's success in Argentina also in that case. A big question which we might discuss now is how can we get these people back on democratic track? I don't know really, but we might discuss it. Thank you very much for your attention. So, now, yeah. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Hello from my side. I'm really thankful that I have the honor to present here my ideas. My presentation is less empirical than Wolfgang's. It's much more ideas I've been working on with colleagues for the last few years, and I want to get engaged in a discussion about this. And I think this is a great place here. So hopefully we have this discussion later on. So the topic of my talk is contested meanings of democracy and their relevance for comparative politics. And the aim of this presentation is that I want to discuss the relevance of different meanings of democracy for doing research in comparative politics, discuss the potential and the challenge of this debate, and think about the way of making democracy more visible. Might sound a bit crazy, but maybe we can see it later on. And that we, as scientists who discuss and work on democracy, get to a more open, non-hegemonic debate about the idea of democracy. So this is a debate by itself, so we can see. So, since I'm a comparativist, I'm working on democracy in several areas, and a lot of people are doing this stuff. So we have classic research areas, so we have to define what political regimes are democratic or non-democratic, and we have seen with Wolfgang some possible approaches of this. We have studies defining the quality of democracy, so they look into democratic systems and try to find deficient subtypes, for example, and differentiate them from functioning democracies and see what kind of types are there existing. Or we can, as I am a student of political culture, so try to define what is the democratic political culture versus studying political cultures in democracies. But in all of these areas, what do we need? We need definitions or conceptions of democracy so that we can understand what we are talking about, and that we can, on an empirical way, operationalize them, and then we can measure it in the empirical world. And this is a challenge in my perspective by itself. So if we have, and that would be one of my theses, if we have a hegemonic use of a specific concept of democracy we are using, so then most of our research will follow this paradigm and maybe neglect other definitions which exists in the real world of democracy. So when we look at findings from the literature on this, and there's a lot of things going on in the last decades, so what we could see, and as Wolfgang mentioned before, we had for a long time in the West a really high quality of democracy in a lot of countries. But although there was this high quality, there was a discourse in the West, for example, on post-democracy by Crouch and others, who were kind of skeptic what's going on in the democratic countries. But the empirical research looking at this idea of post-democracy didn't found really some empirical hints that prove the idea of post-democracy in this area. But at the same time, we could see that in the political cultures of these democracies, we had discussions about the so-called critical citizens, for example, by Norris and others, who said, okay, there are a lot of people in these democracies who are really supporting the idea of democracy, but are less satisfied with the way it's working. So we have seen it with Wolfgang for Germany as an example. But there was this struggle, and the idea is this a problem, or is it a potential to reform, for example, democracy? And this was an open debate, and it existed before the rise of populism started. And now we have these debates on democratic backsliding and democratic regression and deconsolidation. So something must have happened there in between these periods where these people arise and so on. So some data on this, for example, when you look at the support of democracy in Europe, we can see in a lot of countries in Europe, we have high degrees of support for democracy. And during the period of 1999 to 2014, this is data from a study by Dieter Fuchs and Edeltraud Roller. But we can also see that there are differences between the countries here. We can see we have high support of democracy, for example, in Greece, and in Denmark, a bit lesser here in Belgium or France or Portugal, for example. But it was not a vast problem. When we look at satisfaction with democracy, we can see that the rates are lower, but they also different between the countries. So the discourse about the decline of satisfaction with democracy should be more case-centered and not an overall trend, what we can see, especially that we could see that here are some countries like Switzerland or Norway where the satisfaction with democracy started to rise again. But what was missing in this debate, and now we have more studies on this, was that the understandings of democracy of the people wouldn't be used to explain why there is this difference. So now we have a lot of comparative data on the European Social Survey, for example, or the World Value Survey, who show or who made it possible that we can look into this data and use it for explanations to see why people are less satisfied or less supportive of this idea. We have also data from regional barometers like the Afrobarometer or the Latino Barometer. And this is especially important because we had a lot of scholars in the non-Western world where they early started to look at the way how people look or think about democracy. But one of the aspects was, so do these people think about democracy the same way as in the Western world, kind of, and like this perspective? Are they also supportive of liberal democracy? They didn't look at the Western world. This started far later on, and then they realized, oh, well, in the West, there's also a discrepancy. Not everybody is pro-liberal democracy. They have different understandings too. And I think this is really important because it shows that the world is much more complex in this sense. So we have these differences, and what I wanted to show, for example, for Brazil, you can see it here. It was a study published on the BRAS blog last year by me. So we have here the measure of the quality of democracy in Brazil between 1900 and 2020, and this would be now the interesting thing. So we can see that democracy was on the rise, and then there was this decline in the last years on the macro level. So when we look at the indicators of political culture, we could see how do people support different regime types. And when we look at democracy, we would see, oh, a lot of people, for example, in Brazil here, they support democracy. And when we only look at this, we'd say, yeah, that's really, really great, and they support it. But at the same time, when we look at other indicators, so do they support the rule of the army or expert government, or they want to have a strong leader who's able to not listen to the parliament, for example, we can see there are also a lot of supporters on these issues at the same time. And maybe these are the same people who are supportive of different types of these regimes. And when we look more deeply into essential characteristics of democracy and ask the people, we could see interesting divides here. For example, the people are asked, is it allowed that the army takes over in a democracy if the politics doesn't really work? And we can see that one group of people here in Brazil, they are quite supportive of this idea and say, yeah, this is an essential characteristic of democracy. And there's another group who are less supporters of this idea. This was really interesting after the last election with Bolsonaro, where the military obviously played a role here, and everybody was looking see, will the military now intervene or will they not? They didn't intervene, what was great, yeah. But we could see there are people, they are supporting this still. Equality is a major issue of democracy, and we have also this cleavage. Yeah, we have one group who says no, that isn't an essential characteristic of democracy, and we have another group who says yeah, this should be. Well, we can see there's one maybe more liberal understanding here and one more social democratic understanding of democracy, maybe with Lula and Bolsonaro again. And we have other issues where we can see different places, but again, when we look at these items differently, also independently, and make a rig, so we see much more than just looking how do they do on civil rights, or do they support free elections? So this would be really great, or that women's rights are really important for democracy. You can see a strong support of this issue, yeah, here in Brazil. But we would neglect everything else at the same time, and I think this is kind of problematic because we have a more bigger picture or a more dense picture of the reality. So after looking at these empirics, I want to talk about the scientific debate on this issue. So since the 1950s, we know that democracy is an essentially contested concept, and we have different interpretations of a concept and its function in the scientific discourse, as Gali said. And when we look at the broad literature on democracy, theories of democracy, we have a lot of models of democracy existing, and they are next to each other, talking to each other, and we have this also in our way of looking at democracy, in the way we do it as scientists. But when we have this kind of more hegemonic interpretation or usage of a concept, which we can call by Kuhn a normal science in this kind of paradigm, we look at democracy from one perspective. Maybe this hegemony could be challenged by other perspectives. And at the moment, we have kind of an hegemony of the idea of liberal and representative democracy, which is challenged by others. We can see this challenge obviously in the political sphere, and they use the idea of politics of democracy to destroy in some way democracy in the name of democracy. But we have also this debate in our research community. So here I want to introduce the idea of generative democracy, which says that every democracy produces its own reality. So a democracy is, like every other system, an ongoing dialectic process. And we can see that this democracy is always generative and reproduces reality all by itself. And it produces the positive things and also the challenges. And these are all part of this reality. And people living in a specific democracy do not have the same experiences in this democratic reality. e.g. marginalized groups or the poor versus the rich, etc. So when we talk about, for example, oh, everything is well and the quality is really high, and the people look around and say, so no, I don't have money, I have these other problems and so on, or I'm not accepted, like you said, for the East Germans, for example, they say, no, democracy is not so good, yeah, it's not good for me, and there's this other reality which they try to engage with, this what for example, experts talk about. So when we have this reality of democracy and this reproduction, we can see that there are these challenges, like, for example, the rise of populism, which is kind of a reaction on this way of how democracy functions. So what I think what we need is a stronger societal and also scientific reflection of this process of generative democracy. And so we should also see that we are doing kind of generative democracy research. So we are part of the story. So when we are talking about democracy, how we study it, how we talk about it, how we measure it, how we conceptualize it, we always reproduce this kind of democracy, and we build an own framing of this issue, which is not a problem. First of all, yeah, we can argue, yeah, we need some reference. For example, in comparative policy, we need liberal democracy as a benchmark, and then we can compare other countries. But it's only one way of seeing this, and so since we are an element of this democratic reality and a producer of this reality of democracy, we play a role, and we should more reflect on this. Yeah, and as I say here, the way scientists study democracy and reflect themselves during this process contributes to the reproduction of the democracy itself. So we as scientists should therefore make democracy more visible through the way we look at the reality, and we can do this through different things. We can use different concepts, we can use different theories, we can use different methods. We need different discussions about this issue and get a broader picture what democracy really might is. And that there may be some things which are less invisible. It's like we have a puzzle and we put it all together, but in reality we don't know what the final puzzle will look like. So we are puzzling around and try to understand what democracy is. And this is really interesting when you engage with researchers around the world, where we can see that in some areas democracy is really understood differently. And one of these results of this debate is, for example, the project, The Sciences of the Democracies, which I am part of. It's now also an ECPR network. ECPR is a European Consortium of Political Research. And we have here a series of blog posts. At the moment, it's 107 posts since 2021. It started all with Jean-Paul Gagnon, a researcher from Canada, who is also one of the chief editors of the journal Democratic Theory. And the main idea of the series is to engage in a global discussion on democracy. And they are really completely different approaches to talk about democracy, yeah, where people also discuss these approaches really critically. But the idea was that we need to open up the debate and get to know how it works. So when you look, for example, at Dahl, yeah, Robert Dahl is one of the key scholars in empirical democratic research. And you always find people as himself, they say, oh, democracy is a really broad concept, but we need to start somewhere. And then they gave a thin definition of democracy and use it. And it's completely fine. But it also says that there is much more ongoing. So that's why he first started to talk not about democracy, but about polyarchy, because he said the ideal of democracy couldn't be reached in reality. And so he uses a different concept. In his ongoing research, he's shifted it to talk about democracy and not about polyarchy. But we have a lot of other people, and you can look at textbooks. They always started, oh, democracy is a broad idea, and there are a lot of ways. And when they show empirical data, they always use Freedom House, Polity, and other stuff. It's completely fine. But this is a specific paradigm of talking about democracy again. And we teach the people how to think about democracy with this data. But there might be other ways of talking about democracy either. Also in empirical research and not only in political theory. So these ideas propose challenges for us as comparativists. So when we open the concept of democracy and shifting away from the idea of liberal democracy, we might and get rid of I think if we shouldn't get rid of liberal democracy at all, we have to acknowledge this idea because it's an important idea of a way of how democracy works, but we should maybe expand it. And we have already a lot of ideas and measurements to expand. VDEM has a variety of things which expand on liberal democracy, but we can also use ideas from other areas of the world. So as I would suggest, we have to use global ideas of democracy and study them also globally, which means in the present, we have Western ideas that are studied around the world. For example, liberal democracy or other things, also used by non-Western scholars. But in the future, it could be interesting to use non-Western ideas if they exist. This is open to debate of democracy and studying them also in the Western countries to prove empirically that there are really different meanings, because when we look at them and they find the same ideas represented also in Western countries, so it would be much more interesting and shows us a fuller picture of how democracy works and exists and is thought about than now. And we could use different approaches, so focusing on institutions, which is the main approach momentarily, but we can also look at principles and values. For example, we have tried to use the principle of self-efficacy, political self-efficacy, to study how self-efficacy is, for example, used in different approaches like liberal democracy or communitarianism, and how they try to implement this idea. And we can also focus on practice and discourses and other things. So what could be done? On the one hand, we might try to invent new instruments to study a broader range of meanings of democracy in surveys. And we need more discussions here in the area studies, especially of qualitative research and other areas. And we need to measure it on the macro level. We need more ideas here too. But we have to be aware of a potential danger. And this is quite serious. If we open this debate, we might delegitimize democracy. And this might be a problem, because others could come and say, yeah, now we can see everything could be a democracy. And this is also a really problem, but not everything is democracy. But it's maybe more than the current paradigm. So that is, thank you for your attention, and I'm happy for the comments then. Yeah.
The microphone.
Oh, the microphone, of course.
So, thank you both for your presentations. We start the questions and you can pass on. I start and I pass Natalia. Okay. So I have a more general question you two can answer, and more specific questions about your papers and your presentations. So first, I would like to reflect on the causes of populism and autocratization. Cherry Berman, she's a political science at the US. She wrote a paper called "The Causes of Populism in the West," and she makes an inventory of explanations for this populist rise. And she divides these causes in the demand side and the supply side. So she focuses on social and economic change, but this perspective has some limitations because financial and or social changes alone are not problems. They only cause citizens to become angry, resentful, susceptible to the appeal of populists. If established mainstream politicians and parties, governments fail to respond to these questions. So some scholars focus on the supply side, trying to understand why democratic institutions have become less responsive to citizens, less able to deal with society's problems over time, and then susceptible to this type of populist backlash. I wonder how inequality plays a role in this. How? Inequality. We see that democracy is not thriving in reducing inequality. And some features of democratic governments, such as central banks, judiciary review in Europe, European Union, are distant from majority rule. So can we see this kind of inequality, political and economic inequality, as one of the drivers of this populist rise? Christoph, in your paper about the concept of democracy, you stated that a valid core concept of democracy must refer to the self-efficacy of this regime. So we need to understand and measure democracy in terms of these effects. My question is, how can we measure this concept? How can we measure self-efficacy? Is the same as satisfaction with democracy. Because as Iswolek puts in some of his papers, in polarized societies, satisfaction with democracy is a function of who is in power. If I am a right-wing supporter, I will be satisfied with democracy if there is a right-wing government. So how can we deal with this in empirical terms? And Wolfgang, you present in your paper Populism in Power, the idea that populism is ultimately revealed when it is in power. So we can define or better understand populism when it reaches the government. Then you look at some outcomes of populism in governments, such as state capture and measures against the political opposition. However, can we see it in other areas of public policy, such as economic policy, educational policy, security? Because I'm asking this because it seems that for populism to be successful in measures such as interventions in the judiciary, it needs some level of popular support. So, and this popular support is linked to other policies such as economic growth. So, if you can comment on that. We have maybe 3 questions. Natalia, Maria, and João. Ah, tá. Ah, sim. Fazer as 3 depois eu faço uma palavra. Tem 3? Já tem. Eu saí na hora.
Thank you very much for your presentations. I wanted to ask something to Wolfgang about, I don't know if I misunderstood it, but you said that the main source for the support for AfD and the anti-immigrant sentiment comes from Eastern Germany, right? Is that correct? So I was curious about how this late communist society has so quickly came to the other extreme of the political space, because here I think we experienced this populism ascension here in Brazil in the right wing, from people who suffered from this exclusion from public policies that promoted people that were poor and they came from left wing governments. So I was curious about how fast they came across from one side to the other. Thank you.
Two questions from the audience.
Hi, thank you for your presentation as well. My question is also about the first paper on populism, I think that you presented, and specifically on the first dimension of populism that you established as populist political communication. And there are some subcategories, subdimensions there, and what I paid attention on was that all 4 countries studied complied with all requirements only in this category. So my question is whether these traits are or not traits of populism or of political communication itself. Because mostly if you think of the first one, permanent electoral campaigning, it seems to me that is the new normal of political communication. If you think of the war of battles online, heavy social media use, coordinated attacks, and can be thought of even as a strategy of political survival. So the first one, electoral campaigning, but also the second one, attacks to opposition, it seems to me that it can be understood as the new normal of political communication and not only traits of populists. So what do you think about it?
Okay. That's it, or another one? Another one. Okay, I'll try to...
Pode ser, tá. Hi, thank you very much for your presentations. I mean, I enjoyed them both, as a matter of fact. I have a couple of comments. I don't know if they're questions. They're kind of questions mixed with comments, something like that. I will start with Wolfgang. You classify the U.S. as not having legal measures against elections, right? I think in the table you should. Yeah, I think they were exempt from this problem, I think. Did I get it right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right?
No, discriminatory legalism means or where do you have it? Influence on electoral system, you mean? That's
influence of what?
Influence on electoral system.
Because it seems to me that in the U.S., since elections are regulated regionally, right, by states, sometimes even locally, I think there's a lot of institutional influence on electoral systems, like gerrymandering, for example, has been rampant particularly under Republican governance. And also you have all sorts of measures against particularly, black population, black voters in the South. So I think that should be taken into account when you pass a judgment on the United States, if we're allowed to do that. And also compare, and as you presented the data on Germany, of course, immediately I started comparing with Brazil and Bolsonaro, because, of course, like we political scientists have this penchant for comparison, right? And it seems to me, I thought some things were very interesting, because you show that there's a correlation between preference for the right wing and economic depression, right? And in Brazil, it's kind of the opposite if you think in terms of region. So if you take survey data and you run regressions, you find that region is a very important variable. There's a lot of significance and also a lot of interaction with the electoral and the preferences of voters. But it's not like that. I think the richest regions tend not to vote more for Bolsonaro than the poor ones. But even if you control for income, right, region is more important than income. If you look at income only, control for the other variables, including region, you see that it's funny, because it's an interesting profile, because I think people who make from 0 to 2 minimum wages of income tend to vote more for Lula in the left, and the bracket right above it, from 2 to 5, they prefer Bolsonaro above all the other, brackets. So it's interesting. There's almost these guys who are like making it out of poverty. They jump on the bandwagon of the extreme right. I don't know why, but I bet that happens all over, right?
Yeah, that's the same. I will.
Yeah, and also a comment on xenophobia. In Brazil, we don't have much xenophobia, but there are some region events of xenophobia. For example, in Rondônia, which is a state that borders Venezuela, they get a lot of Venezuelan migrants there. And there's a lot of xenophobia against these guys. But it's interesting because these are people who have more contact with foreigners and with migrants, not the opposite, as you argued. You know what I'm saying? Of course, that this is not a national issue. I think we have to take that into consideration when judging this. But I think it contrasts with the data, the analysis you presented on Germany. And for Christoph, it's a theoretical comment. I think it's basically impossible to control the semantics of a concept such as democracy. Going back to Kozelek that we were discussing at the bar. And, I think that the whole theory of the concept of the history of concepts shows well, and not only the theory, the data shows that every key concept has so much different projects and movements that, use it, appropriate it, and define the concept according to their own, agenda, right? That it's an impossible dream unless you think that there is a hegemony of representative democracy as compared to direct democracy. But direct democracy is something that happened only for 2 centuries, 500 years before Jesus Christ was born, if he ever was. But so you see, there is no direct democracy, as a matter of fact. So in this very general sense, yes. But when you go underneath this generality and you start to, distinguish different types of democracy, it's almost impossible to. The only way to do that is to crush the opposition and impose a concept. But that would be like breaking democracy, right? Crushing democracy with it. So, and that's why I think that the concept of paradigm doesn't apply very well to that, because, Kuhn presupposed that in order to have a paradigm, and he thought that social science would never have one, right? Or at least they did not have one when he wrote. And you have to have such a degree of hegemony that I think the concept of democracy will never reach. So, and just a final comment, I think that when we use, and I agree with you, I think I agree with most of your presentation, but I think that when we use this survey question about, what do you think about democracy? How do you feel about democracy? And here in Brazil, they make it more complicated. They ask people usually, what do you think of the democratic regime? I think it's too much of a political science, political scientist question that most people actually don't understand exactly what is it about. They don't have this kind of reflection about political systems that they can compare to other types of political systems and then come to the conclusion that democracy is the best.
So I start. Thank you very much for all these very good questions. I start trying to combine the inequality question with the income question, because this is related. Actually, it's quite interesting. I start with Germany and the alternative for Germany, and then we might broaden the view a little bit. It's quite interesting. It's more or less the same. It's not. We know quite well who are voting for the AfD. I try to grab why, but if we take a look at who is voting for the AfD, not the poor people. The typical voter is male, middle-aged, and has a mid-level education background, and he's working. He's working in quite good positions. He's working as a mechanic or as a technical engineer or something like that. That's the typical voter. So it's not the people who are really poor. The people who fear to lose something. And they fear losses because they experienced many losses, and they now see, as I explained, more changes. So from a European perspective, I talked that this is one explanatory variable trying to explain why people vote for populism or for right-wing populism, but the economic explanation itself does not lead us very much if we do not combine it with the perception. So it's not the economic situation itself which is bad, it's the perception that the economic situation might deteriorate. You might lose within the next years. And due to globalization, due to immigrants coming to your country, getting the jobs, getting the accommodation, the housing, which is pretty tight in Germany, but also in other European areas. So they fear that they have to compete with these people. So that's why inequality is not really a big issue on the European side, because it's not that the poor tend to go to the right wings, but the mid-level segment is going to the right wing. I think we also learned in Germany in the 30s when we analyzed who voted for the Nazi party, and that were not the poor people, they were communists or whatever at that time, but it was the state employees and the mid-level thing, and they wanted to avoid change, avoid losing what they earned and what they achieved. And this might relate also to the Bolsonaro thing, right? When the people who get out of poverty and they don't want to go back, so they do everything to avoid losing. And this is having very much related to the voting for populist parties in Europe. People who want to avoid losing something, and they blame the immigrants being responsible for all of that. And this is the central explanatory variable in Europe. All the right-wing populists claim immigrants are responsible for everything. They are responsible that you lose your job. They are responsible that you might lose. People don't lose the job nowadays in Germany, as we say. We need immigrants. We need a lot of immigrants, so we have a lot of free jobs there, so people don't lose jobs. But this is the narrative of the right-wing populists. You might lose your job, you might lose your house, you can't go out into the street anymore. You lose personal security because of this immigration. This is one thing. Second thing, contact hypothesis with foreigners. Yeah, contact does not mean that you just see them on the street, coming here or living on the street or being there in some areas. Contact hypothesis means that you really have contact with them, that you learn about them, that you talk with them, that you get neighbors and your children go together to school, so you really have close contact and you diminish your prejudices through that. And what we see in East Germany, but we also see it in, I will shortly say, in other countries, is that there hardly had been any foreigners for decades. And then a bunch of foreigners came and they saw them standing around at the central train station and or in shopping areas, shopping malls. But they don't know them. They don't know their names. They don't know the background. They just see they are black or brown, or usually they are black or brown, and maybe they have scarves if there are some women over there. So they are different. And that's what make them fear the people. So maybe, I don't know exactly what went on in Rondonia, but maybe this was a bunch of Venezuelan immigrants came immediately, but did they really have contact with them? Did they really interact with them socially? Or was it just they were there and they were seen as a problem? So,
Not really.
Yeah, so that's... So I have colleagues who advocate for the regional and local governments, telling them always, you need to establish communication rooms where the people come together, social rooms, and foreigners and locals come together, and the government say, are you crazy? This will end in fighting or whatever. So they want to avoid that. But this is what contact hypothesis means. You really have to need contact to learn that they are human beings like us, men, that they have a family background and they are nice people and things like that. I've been growing up with Turkish neighbors. I'm from West Germany, so I've been growing up with Turkish neighbors. I now have a Moroccan neighbor, an African one, Polish neighbors. So, and these are my neighbors. I know how the children went with my children to school. So that's what the meaning of having contact is, and not they're coming there and they're standing there. Then they are seen as a threat, because before you have, but even in the regions, and that's more interesting, but even in the regions where there are hardly any foreigners at all, they are perceived as a threat because they might come. It's we talked about that. It's like the debate with the wolf in Germany, because this is a symbol for the analysis of right-wing populism. The wolf is coming, and all the children's stories of the bad wolf is here, and this is similar to the bad foreigner. I told Bruno that there is not any proven incidents that a wolf has ever attacked a man in Germany, ever, since medieval era.
There are many tales.
There are many tales about that, and that's how it works with the foreigners. They are just the tales. So that's about contact with foreigners and populism. So I think inequality, was that enough? Okay. Populist policies, that's a very, very interesting thing, and we're working on that at the moment. I have a friend and colleague. He is analyzing environmental policies and the positions of right-wing populists towards environmental policies. We know that they deny climate change, but they also want to preserve, at least in Germany and other areas, preserve nature, because they're linked to romanticism a little bit. So this is very interesting what he's studying. The idea is that we should follow the idea of the thin ideology as promoted by Karlsruhe, because we can see that there are different, if we just take a look at economic and social policy, we have two big strands. And this is not related to left or right wing. This is also within the right wing populist parties and movements. You have on one hand the nationalist orientation, like in France, Rassemblement, Marine Le Pen and the Rassemblement pour la France promotes nationalist policies, which means for French people only, right? A more social policy, but for French people. That's exactly, for example, combined with anti-migration. That's exactly what the Polish PiS party has done. They have increased social aid for poor people. They have increased the pensions and for old people. They have increased family allowances for the first time. If you have children in Poland, you now get money from the state as help. And they did that not officially only for Polish people, but there are hardly any foreigners in Poland. So that wasn't a big debate. Kwiat, the Polish government, and also Poland, they have helped hundreds of thousands, more than 1 million Ukrainian refugees without a big debate. They accepted them. Why? They said they are like us. They are our friends and neighbors. They are Christian. They are white. We will help them. But when it comes to Muslim or African immigrants, then it's a no-go. So the social policies of the PiS party helped mainly Polish people. So that was linked to them. On the other side, we have several populist parties, governments, movements, or parts of coalition governments. They are quite liberal. We have to say they are neoliberal, like the Austrian ones, for example, the German Alternative for Germany. They are really neoliberal. They want to diminish social subsidies. They want to lower social spending. That's the official part of their program. Also, I've shown you Geert Wilders, who is in economic policy very, very liberal, outward-oriented, neoliberal, we would say. So we have a branch of right-wing populists who have national, like Trump a little bit, maybe, I don't know, national protectionist policy approach in economic policies, and expansion of social policy, but we also have the neoliberal branch with the reduction of social policy. And Another very interesting thing is the societal approach or societal policy. I don't know how to express it better, which is, and that's a common thing in almost all of them, but they have variation, which means women's rights are limited, especially in Poland has almost abolished abortion rights for women completely. Other parties or right-wing populist parties, they promote really a very traditional family-oriented idea. Women should stay at home, get a lot of children, and take care of the family. That's it. And women should not participate in politics or anything like that if it's not really necessary. They should vote for the party, for the populists, but that's all. And LGBTQ plus rights should be diminished. This is a waste of time. Also, other areas. There's just one big exception, and this is Geert Wilders, I've mentioned, from the Netherlands. He is very much in favor of LGBTQ plus rights, because this is one of element of anti-Islam, because Islam is against LGBTQ plus rights and women's rights. So Geert Wilders says, we want to support our gays and our women and help them against the Muslim immigrants. So then it fits together. So there's kind of lines. And that's why I think this hidden ideology approach by Krasmutter helps us more explain some things going on, let's say, and fit within the category. Political communication, yes, you're right. With the first part, with the permanent electoral campaign, this has become some kind of thing. But I think we understand it in a different way and combined, let's say, with the other measures, because demagogy against opposition, that was not how it used to be in democracies in Europe. Opposition, especially democratic opposition, was seen as legitimate. They were rivals. Nowadays, the narratives have changed. Recently, I was in a party meeting of the Christian Democrat Party, and they spoke openly about the Green Party is our new enemy. And I asked them, since when do we have enemies between democratic parties? And one of the more moderate ones said, oh yes, you're right, they are rivals, not enemies. But some of them people said, and that's what we meant, that the idea that the opposition is delegitimized. And that's new. That has not started yet, at least in Europe, that hasn't started yet between the democratic parties. They do not delegitimize the opposition so far. And also this missionary relationship is not yet established in democratic parties, but this is typical for the populist approach, I think. And especially these two things combined with a permanent electoral campaign means that they always say, yeah, here the opposition party, they are traitors, as I said, etc. And this is something which did not happen in established democracies before, where you talked with elements we didn't find new elements of manipulation. These were the old established ones, let's say, which is a very pity for the United States, but they were not new elements introduced like in other countries where you, I don't have a good example now in mind for manipulation of electoral system, which is, well, changing the rules of the game, let's say, because these gerrymandering started in the 19th century already, like in the United States, or the misusing or banning Afro-Americans from voting. That has a very long tradition. Then it got lost, but
requiring ID to vote.
Yeah, exactly. That's an innovation. Yeah, you're right. That's an innovation, and also these
ideas that now the southern states are not anymore under the control of the Voting Rights Act. This is something, but it was, yeah, okay, we have to think about it if this was part of Trump or if this was part of the Republican Party, which I would differentiate still a little bit, but it's starting to getting more problematic. Well, ultimately, my last answer is the communist society going to the right. Who asked that? You asked that about in East Germany. That's a very, very, very good question, which many of my colleagues and I myself, we were really astonished how fast this was going on. There's one thing which is affiliation to autocracy, to authoritarian style of politics. This seems to be deeply rooted after 40 years of communism, which was really hardcore communism. That was not Lula or Pate, or that's not communism. That was a real communist dictatorship where people could not freely express their opinion or things like that. There were several hundred thousands of political prisoners in the GDR and things like that. So there was really a tight control of the society. In the German Democratic Republic, they had the biggest intelligence service compared to the size of the population, which tried to control everything. And this made the people, perhaps, we're still trying to find a good way, but perhaps this made people prone to authoritarian solutions for problems. Yeah? And
because officially that's not possible. If you're a communist, there's no right-wing extremism. So this didn't happen. And if there was someone showing up, and there were organizations, we know that now, the intelligence service, the Stasi in the German Democratic Republic, they issued surveys on right-wing extremists in the German Democratic Republic, but they were never published. They were under the table and oppressed because this could not be.
It's better not to talk about.
It's better not to talk about. And when communism went away, they immediately popped up and aligned with Western Nazis, and many Nazis from West Germany. Immediately, they were very unsuccessful in Western Germany, so they immediately moved to East Germany because there was a void of anything. There was no state control. Police had no control in the 89, 90, no one respected the police or anything. So they went there and they started establishing right-wing organizations, right-wing parties, Nazi parties popped up, and many voters of the Communist Party in the GDR, they switched after being disappointed by the development of politics, switched then to the far right, because the old left party, the old Communist Party, they changed into Democratic Socialist Party, let's say, and they became quite pragmatic. They started governing in regional governments. They became mayors of towns, and as a mayor, you cannot be so ideological. You have to take care of the school, of the streets, and whatever. And this made some people make them feel disappointed by all these things, and so that, okay, so now I switch to right wing, which did not only happen in Germany, it happened also in France in a very high level, that the many voters of the Rassemblement National, they tended to vote for the Communist Party in France, especially workers. They were disappointed by the Communist Party, especially the era when the Socialist Party, François Mitterrand in the 80s, with the support of communists, governed at that time. And they were highly disappointed by all what happened, and then they switched to the right-wing extremists, to at that time the Front National, and that's what we can see. And this is on one hand explained by the disappointment, and I would say authoritarian personality maybe is one thing, I don't know.
But in France, in that case, they would not have this experience with authoritarian.
No.
I can relate
No.
that to
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
Brazil case that
Yeah.
we here
Yeah.
call it the widowers of the dictatorship that we had. It was a right-wing
Yeah.
regime, and that would relate to what we are experiencing here, which what I have been experiencing. But in France, they would not have this.
No, it's out. No, they don't have this, but they still, we have the shift. And what in France is more relevant at the beginning, and now we see the same thing in East Germany, is the racism there. There is a deep-rooted, that's what French sociologists told me, and that's what I read in the books. There was a deep-rooted racism within the French working class against immigrants, and this was not dealt with. That's the
By side, that was not dealt with by established politicians, especially left-wing parties. They usually do not follow any racist appeals or things like that. So they switched to right-wing also in France. So this is something. Yeah, I think that's, we can, maybe we have more questions and we can go dig a little bit deeper on that. Thank you.
So, thank you for your, does it work?
Yeah.
Thank you for your questions and your comments. I will first start with Bruno. Shall I also say something about the inequality issue? It was this general question, because I think when we talk about democracy, we have also to talk about capitalism, of course.
Yes.
And when I say democracy reproduces its reality, does capitalism makes it the same way? And democratic systems are capitalist systems. And when we see and we look at the data, for example, by Piketty, as you mentioned before, we can see that inequality is on the rise, and there's no stop of it. And this has, of course, this impacts, of course, the way people see how politics work and influences their lives. So we can go into this maybe deeper. When we talk about, you ask also about this issue of self-efficacy. So when I was discussing with my colleagues Norma and Thoralf, which we together wrote this paper, we were discussing, okay, how can we approach to think about when you ask people, for example, in surveys, people refer democracy to real elections. But when we look, for example, at the Gettysburg Address for Lincoln, he says, okay, democracy is government of the people, by the people, for the people. There's nothing about elections or other institutional rules, for example. And when we thought about, okay, what is important for the people, we thought, okay, the way we experience self-efficacy, and this is a really established concept in political sociology, and yeah, we can talk about external self-efficacy and internal self-efficacy, and we thought, okay, maybe this could be a starting point to think how democracy helps people feel that they experience self-efficacy. And when you look at the studies published on this issue, we could see that people more and more have less a feeling in the Western countries that they experience self-efficacy in the political realm. And this is a problem because in the same time, we experienced more and more self-efficacy and control of our daily lives in other areas. Yeah, where we can, for example, where we have are able to decide what we will watch on TV, where what we read, and so on. We have more possibilities today. For example, especially also in the West, We have more experience, but not in the political way. We have still just elections and so on. And one prominent case here is, for example, Ireland. There was this debate and there was this kind of self-efficacy, and they started these citizen assemblies where they brought together citizens and politicians to debate really strong policy issues, which haven't been solved from all the governments before. And there was religious issues, for example, and other things. And then there was this, not only these citizen assemblies, but there was a public debate about this. This was streamed, you can inform yourself about this, and there was this debate. And they brought up solutions. And there were these ordinary people engaging, first of all, with politicians, so they come together and talk and see, oh, they are not so elitist, for example. So people have views about politicians and they say, no, they are not, or other groups, different groups of society. And they came in contact, and this whole process started, and there is empirical data, it's really well surveyed and studied in Ireland, that they see that during this period, self-efficacy rose in the whole of the society, because the people got this feeling, okay, yeah, we have elections and we have this process, and we get control back. It's not only the politicians decide, so we have more influence. So in Germany, we have also started to make citizen assemblies, but they are not related to politics. They are for their own, they discuss issues, and then they've got this report at the end, and they hand it over to the politicians and say, so that's our ideas, and we think it's good. And the politicians can say, yeah, okay, well, that's fine, thank you. We look it up, and maybe we can do something. But in Ireland, it was a different process. And so we can see maybe, for example, institutional design can help to re-establish self-efficacy. But when we go to other countries, the same type of institutionalization might not work, because it must fit to the society itself. And maybe we can look, and we try to look this up empirically, if there are other ways in other societies how people engage in self-efficacy, maybe through civil society, where they can see, oh, we have more power and we can make more when politics is too far away, and this can help us. And we have also these other institutions which are discussing the topic of democratic innovation. So like the Bürgerhaushalte, it's in English.
Participativo.
Yeah, that's from Brazil, and budgetary participation. Yeah, and in Germany that was a really new thing in the 2000s. So we have to do this too, and so you can see maybe this works and maybe it doesn't. But we thought this could be an improvement of this. I wouldn't say that self-efficacy is the same as being satisfied with the life. It is related, because when you experience this, you feel better. Yeah, you see, oh, I have control about something. And we can see when people vote for a party and this party got not into the government, they are less satisfied with democracy. The winners are satisfied because they now have kind of control in their minds what the government will do in the next years, and the losers are less satisfied. So there is something about this issue, and we can think about it. But this was the first approach. And maybe there are different suggestions, and I'm open to it, how we can do this. But we wanted not to look at, okay, freedom or equality or other abstract concepts, because this is a personal experience, and you could measure it, of course, via surveys maybe. But I think in this whole issue, and this relates to Joao's comment, we have to maybe talk more about the issues with people, not through surveys, but maybe with, for example, what's really prominent now in Germany are focus groups and other things. So you engage people, not interviewing one person. You have a group of people who are discussing these issues, and they relate to each other and say, oh, I experience it like this. And so and other person says, no, I don't experience it, I see it like this way. And you have a discussion, and you look at this, and there's a dynamic in this, and you can get something out, because you can then dig deeper and maybe use these these informations for improving surveys. And this is what I think, what I wanted to, or what I try to say when you make democracy visible. So I'm coming from survey research. And when we look at the studies out there, for example, the World Value Survey or the European Social Survey, they ask the people what is essential about democracy in different ways. So both surveys shed different lights on this debate. Yeah, when we look at the World Value Survey, they ask these 3 questions about liberal democratic items, and we have these anti-democratic items, and we have some substantive items. And then you can, when you have the data, you can combine it. When you look at the European Social Survey, they don't do this. They have different forms of measuring democracy, like participatory democracy, deliberative democracy, liberal democracy, and other things. But and this gives us new insights on how people think about democracy. What they don't do is measure anti-democratic things. So you can't talk about these issues with this other data. So you have different ways making things visible. And maybe there are other issues we don't ask people yet. And we need other approaches, methodological approaches, to see how people relate their ideas to this abstract idea of democracy. You're right. When we, for example, there's a lot of surveys, they ask the substantive issues. So democracy and inequality should be reduced, or other related issues. And for example, a colleague of mine in Baden-Württemberg, they made a project and they made also interviews with a lot of people, and they realized when the people talk about democracy, they don't talk about social issues at all in this area. It didn't came up. So we ask people and they say, oh, I have to answer this. Yeah, I can say this and that. But we don't know how important is it really for them. And when they are talking about these issues, they maybe reflect on something completely different, which we as scientists don't realize what they relate to, and which we wouldn't maybe not relate to democracy at all. And I think this was the puzzle we as scholars had when we tried to survey the people. How shall we do this? What shall we ask? How abstract shall we ask? Or what kind of things shall we use to understand how people define democracy and how important these aspects is? So there are, as I showed you with this network, there are really different approaches out there to get into this, and they help to shed light on different aspects of this puzzle. I would agree that it is not possible to study every idea of democracy. Yeah, I would agree with this, but I would also suggest that we should not say, yeah, it's not possible, so we stop it. And we just keep on going with the way we look at democracy as we have done it the last 20, 30 years. I don't think that is helpful, because I think when societies are dynamic and we have an ongoing process. And if we just stick with this, we should need this data, because then we can look on it with a time series analysis. But I think we should also include other aspects to understand more about the way people think about this issue. We could also neglect the idea of democracy at all in this issue and talk about what kind of form of government they need, or what they hope that politics, why is politics for? Yeah, what they expect of it at all. And maybe some people say, I don't want to, like the libertarians, they don't want to have an influence by the state at all. And others would say, no, we need the state to improve things. And there is this discrepancy, and I think we should look at this. And the last issue is Kuhn. We now have just submitted a proposal for a section for the next ECPR conference next year in Dublin. And one of the panels we submitted is there really a paradigm of democracy? Yeah. And can we talk about this? And maybe when you look at Kuhn, he gives some indicators where you can look at, for example, textbooks, how people talk about this. And this could be one approach, but we can discuss it.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah, of course.
In American political science for decades, I mean, minimalistic approach
Yeah.
to democracy
It's Dahl.
based on Schumpeter, right?
Yeah, or Dahl.
Or Dahl, yeah, Dahl
Yeah.
Schumpeter prevailed.
Yeah, it prevailed.
It
Yeah,
was a paradigm of sorts.
yeah, but that would be a paradigm.
Rational choice, let's say, for decades. I would say it was a very influential paradigm. Let me just add one or two things.
Maybe I can.
Because I have a question for you, just maybe because my last slide asked, how can we get back all these people back to democratic track, and alluding to what Christoph said is that's what we discuss on the field. We do not discuss this in an abstract way like Christoph. We discuss this with politicians, with mayors on the field in my region, in the northeast of Germany where I come from. Is participation good? Should we have more participatory elements like this, citizen councils, like citizen participation? Can we get the people back on democratic track? That's what the politicians then ask me, and I say, "Oh, I don't know. I really don't know." But I would like to ask this question here in the round.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. Really excellent. I will first make a comment on Christopher's presentation. I will switch the order. It made me wonder about the political anthropology. Your presentation, really interesting thing. And I'm remembering some readings about just the democracy as a phenomena only making sense on certain junctures, political junctures, for instance, where state exists and where some inequality exists. Otherwise, think about democracy. It's not very, doesn't make sense in a sense. So democracy has to do in a more abstract level with political violence and with the possibility of a link between what people want and and government behavior. So it's a comment. It's not a question, but I'm wondering how this kind of abstract way of thinking about democracy dialogues with your concern about the concept of democracy. And Wolfgang, I have two basic questions and a comment, and this comment is based on doing research about the Brazilian contest. Basic question is about the ADF. How would the coalitional potential of the party is it possible to think about a coalition between ADF and the Christian Democrats? And it has to do with the second question. If you think this Bavaria is functioning like a buffer. It's a protection against the radical right in Germany. It's a basic question. Okay. My comment has to do with the objective condition of the emerging of the right wing extremists. I'm doing some research about economic geography in Brazil and political behavior and political votes and it had to do with João concern. So we have in Brazil a clear cleavage, regional cleavage in what concerns the vote. You have the northeast, northwest voting, voting for the left, and the other regions, voting for the right. So we are conducting some research thinking about economic phenomena or economic trends having to do with this. And we are discovering interesting things. And the main point is about deindustrialization and the vote. And I'm learning about the same thing happening in Germany. So you will see some kind of correlation between unemployment and other objective conditions in East Germany and deindustrialization. If you think about political sociology, you have clear explanations about why this happens. It has to do with union membership. It has to do with economic shocks, if you want. So I'm wondering if we are talking about same basic phenomena, which has to do with economic conditions, but more specifically with industrialization and deindustrialization.
Shall I start? Maybe?
One last point. It's about populism and right-wing extremism. Yes, I think it's time to do a basic statistic study and see if you have really such a thing as authoritarian left around the world, or is this a specific Latin American case in Venezuela and other country and other.
Well, I would like to thank for the presentations. I have wrote some questions here, but I don't know if I'm going to read all of them. So, are there explanations for why some countries autocratise themselves with a populist leader while others that have elected a populist leader don't? Like, I'm thinking of autocratization in a long period, not only in during the mandate, like it becomes it autocratizes itself. And institutions have any role in the maintenance of democracy or even the civil society or civil movements? And the other is using the definition of populism in this dialogical sense, could Israel be seen as autocracy and Netanyahu is a populist far-right leader? And in the paper, Israel is considered the only democracy in the North African and Middle East, even though the author is one of them, put Israel in check as a democracy. And I don't know, for me, it's strange to think in an ethnic state as a modern state, because it is anti-pluralistic in its own terms. And it seems to be an ancient polis or a middle-age political organization rather than a modern state, because it's ethnic in its own foundations. And you said before the presentation, in the presentation, I don't know if it's came clear that I was not so convinced that Semitism or anti-Semitism is the core of the conservative ideology, perhaps anti-Muslims, you said, and anti-Arabic. So ethnicity and brown, black color as the core of the conservative and anti-immigration, as you show in the AfD slogans. None of them said anything about Jews or Semitism, but said about Arabic ethnicity and Muslims and so on. So it seems to me that is the core of the conservative ideological. And that's for Christoph. It's not a question. It's rather I don't know. It's really grateful to hear you talking about that, because it's what I think. But I'm just a master student, So hearing a professor saying this, putting this, the theories of democracy in check, it's very, for me, it's very grateful for hearing it with this explanation. So thanks a lot for your presentation. Thanks.
Well, you want to start, or shall I start?
I can start.
Okay.
So thank you for your question or your comment. It's kind of, it's not funny, but so I'm studying democracy, but another field or area which I am addicted to is stateness or statehood, research on failing states, fragile states, and so on. And in the last years, I was the coordinator of a research group, which was an interdisciplinary research group, and it was about the way people self-organize under weak statehood in the modern world, and there, especially in the global south. And there was one research group, one project from the political science group. They worked together with Silvana Krause in Porto Alegre, and there are other groups. There were anthropologists, but also archaeologists, theologists, and they looked also at the antiquity. And the idea was, okay, if we have states that are not willing or able to serve the people's needs, what will people do then? And as you said before, someone of you two said before, democracy is, when we look at human history, a newer phenomenon, and stateness also, yeah. And we have political orders in societies all around the world, different kind of political orders. They got established and they declined and so on. And there's always this combination of what kind of form of order we have. Is it a state or is it a polity in the antiquity? And is this way of how the people are ruled there, is it democratically or autocratically governed? There's this mixture. And what we saw in this project, and it's not all the results are there yet, but you could see that people, of course, are able to organize themselves without a state. They can solve problems. There is a need and they can make it. And it's interesting because, for example, Germany is a really state-centered society. So if there is a problem, it's the state's fault and the government's fault. Maybe in the US, people wouldn't say, oh, the state should do this or that. We do this or that. Yeah, we have our organizations of our society and we do this. And what we can now see is that, for example, in Germany and maybe also in other European countries, I haven't now data yet for this, but what we can see is that there's a shift away from the state. And this is really became impressive during the pandemic, because during this period of time, the state intervened directly in the lives of the people immensely. And for my generation and others, people were really, this was a new experience, who you meet and everything else. Yeah, and what how to live your life during, for example, especially in the first month of this pandemic. And this way of interaction between the state and the people, groups like, for example, esoteric groups become politicized, because now there was an intervention, which is, it was not about democracy. There was a democratic decision, but the state was really strong now in engaging in this. And it was, and people got now afraid and said, okay, no, we don't want this kind of state or political order. We want less state. Yeah, so it's an experience here. And there we can see, like for example, yeah, we talked about Argentina, when you have now a political leader who is really anti-statist, and we have libertarian thought since, I don't know, the whole 20th century, and it's a strong issue that you don't need a state who's regulating a lot of things. So maybe people got now more engaged in this, and this is what's interesting me, because I don't think that everything is of some groups in also in European societies or Western societies. It's not all about democracy, but it's also about how the state or political order is influencing the life of the people. And if they lose control here, and they say, oh, I can't live my life as I want to, this might be a problem. And this is, I think this is a new trend. And he said, yeah, the state is a prerequisite for democracy, and this is kind of common sense in the study of democracy. Yeah, when you look at transition research and the measure of quality of democracy, everybody says, yeah, we need a state, and then we can experience democracy and can build it up. And without a state, we can decide what we want, but the rule is not, the laws are not implemented, and you can't get connected to this. But I would agree with this, but maybe there are also some democratic practices existed before the state exists on the local level. People organize and decide in their groups without a state, but they organized them in kind of. You're a skeptic, okay? Yeah, but okay, they have a kind of an order. Yeah, they have also a hierarchy. Yeah, of people maybe on the top, and so some groups started egalitarian, and then the hierarchy existed or built it up because they got bigger and they needed more structure here. And this is also a process which we saw in our project, yeah, here. And but this made me think we might take a broader look about these issues, and the state, for example, is not really present in political culture research. We have studies who just look at confidence or trust in some state institutions, and only some state institutions, not all state institutions. In some countries, you can't decide which institution is part of a state, of a political regime, and so on. And these are, of course, academic debates, and for the people, it might be not as interesting, but they experience this in reality for what these institutions say. And I think this is interesting to look at it too. Yeah.
Okay, my. Well, thank you very much for these great questions, all of that. Let's start with Israel. I think that's a misunderstanding. Israel is not an ethnic democracy. There are Jews, there are Christians, there are Muslims living in Israel, there are Africans, Europeans, Arabs living in Israel. As long as you have Israeli citizenship, you have full democratic rights. Freedom of opinion, freedom of etc. So if you don't have Israeli citizenship and living in Gaza or at the West Bank, yeah, then you have lost. But if you have the Israeli citizenship, it's a democracy. Nevertheless, what we see in recent years is the same thing in many other countries, a trend of democratic backsliding. I don't know. I really don't know if Netanyahu would qualify as a populist. I'm not a specialist, but he has a coalition with fundamentalist religious parties, and they want to make Israeli a Jewish state. And that's why thousands of people have been protesting in Tel Aviv and other states. So here's the fight between fundamentalism, religious fundamentalism, in that case Jewish religious fundamentalism, against a secular democratic state. This is a different story, but this is also very, very interesting in that here to analyze, let's say, but I didn't talk about it in my presentation. Anti-Semitism and AfD. Well, right-wing populists, not only Alternative for Germany, also Front National in France, heavily anti-Semitism for decades. However, the number of Jews is quite limited, especially in Germany nowadays, due to historical facts, but also in France, there are much less Jews than Muslims. So anti-Muslim is more important on the agenda. That's right. But still, and sometimes they play with each other, claiming that, oh, we have to support now. There are some right-wing extremists, populists. That's a good comment that we have to think more properly about that. Playing on these aspects, saying we have to support Israel because they are against Muslims. But there's a deep-rooted anti-Semitism within right-wing movements in Europe. That's there. That's definitely there. Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely. Theories of autocratization, I do not get the question anymore, but basically we use the same theories for democratization studies like modernization theory, cultural theory, political culture, and other approaches in order, but reverse it then and try to explain autocratization processes on the long run. Also historical factors like less experience with democracy, and then we are back to the communist society. When we, for example, look at East Germany, we had a long history of limited democracy, limited autocracy in the 19th century. We had then just a few years of democratic experience in Germany in the 20s after the First World War, and then we had 12 years of a really hard Nazi dictatorship, and then 40 years of communist dictatorship. That means that in East Germany there's hardly any experience with democracy historically rooted. While in West Germany we at least have now more than 40 years of now it's even more. Now it's 49, let's say 50, about 70, around 70 years of experience with democracy. So which makes it a little bit better. Before that, still a problem. That does not explain everything, but that's a factor. And we find very often very deeply rooted historical effects. Also, institutional factors, of course, play a role, but it's not as easy as Juan Linz maybe thought, that presidentialism is bad and parliamentarism is good. We have Viktor Orban in a parliamentary regime. We have in Poland a parliamentary regime. We recently had elections in Slovakia where also a populist came into power. So it's also parliamentarianism. But it's a factor, but it's combined with party system. Also, unitary and federal state plays an important role with different checks and balances within the system, and also the way judiciary is organized and how judges are elected. So institutional factors matter, but it's not as easy to say that's the way to autocracy and that's the way to democracy. I think it's much more complex. A very, very interesting thing is what you mentioned, the left-wing populism. We do have quite a few examples of left-wing populism in Latin America. Not only Hugo Chavez, Rafael Correa in Ecuador, Morales in Bolivia, Kirchnerismo in Argentina. Clearly, it was a left-wing populism, socially very progressive, women's rights, abortion rights, LGBTQ+ rights, social policy spending, etc. And on the other hand, populist in its original form with we represent the will of the people against the elite, in that sense, the economic elite, not any immigrants, but it was an anti-elitist element with Kirchnerismo. I would say so.
All left-wing parties.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They're all populists.
No, it depends on how they characterize that, how they do that. That's the ideological dimension. We also have the strategic dimension, which is how they do it, and they try to manipulate the judiciary, the Kirchnerismo. They fought with the conservative press in Argentina, so there was a lot of populist elements. Although I would say that Peronismo lost a little bit of its populism compared to the original times. However, there are also left populisms in Europe, which is Cinque Stelle to a certain degree, or Podemos, which both were really against La Casta, which is not the economic elite, but the political establishment. And they both were not against immigrants. And that's the same thing with La France Insoumise and Mélenchon in France, where there's 20% in the last presidential elections for Mélenchon, and he's also against the political establishment. I'm not sure what he says about the economic establishment. That's mixed a little bit in France, very heavily. But he's against racism. I was there at a rally in September in France where they mobilized thousands of people against racism, against within the police and things like that. So we do have also left-wing populism in Europe. That's understudied in Europe because we always look at the right-wing populists because they are they were perceived as more dangerous. I don't know. We will see. Maybe they're right. Your first, more powerful also maybe, or more violent perhaps also, because we see that Podemos, Cinque Stelle, La Syriza in Greece, yeah, they were there. They tried to reform a little bit, but and within democracy, within democratic rules. So they were not anti-democratic, basically. With Mélenchon, I'm not really sure. What I've read, that's maybe but well, I haven't studied properly Mélenchon yet. Your first question, I'm really a bit sad now because I had exactly a slide on deindustrialization in East Germany, and because of the time limit, I cut it off. Yes, industry in Germany has been completely abolished with the unification process, and because all the companies, most of the companies were not competitive or they lacked investment, etc. However, if we take a look now, and I had a slide where big companies are, and there's not one in East Germany. So, which means there are less well-paid jobs, not in the good, less union membership, but that's not only because of the industry is gone, also because 40 years of forced union membership in communist GDR made the people avoid union membership nowadays. Now it's free, but there are very few people members of union in East Germany. But that's a very, very good and very important point, because this contributed to the feeling, and I want to go back to the inequality thing. In most parts of Europe, not everywhere, but in most parts of Europe, and then especially in East Germany, it has been growing in the last 30 years. It's not that people are poor or so, but the wealth has been growing. Some people have become even more wealthier. So inequality, yes, has been rising, but not people going down and people going up, but everyone rising, but some people rising more than others. And this is combined with this experience of deindustrialization. There's not a single, almost all families in East Germany have experienced unemployment within the last 30 years, whether father, mother, or uncle. So there's a history of unemployment, a personal experience. Yes, and that's what they have in mind. So it could happen. Your jobs are not safe. Whatever happens could be tomorrow, could be gone, and then you're unemployed again. And then, although we have a quite developed social safety net in Germany, it's not nice being unemployed. It's not that you live in you're not hungry. You don't have to live in hunger and poverty, but it's not a life in luxury. A very good question is about the coalitional potential. That's exactly what we are debating at the moment. Next year, there will be regional elections in East Germany, in 3 East German states, and the Alternative for Germany might become the biggest parties in the regions. We now have Netherlands with Geert Wilders. What about the coalitional potential? We have experience with Austria, as I said, Finland, Norway, Sweden not Norway, where they were part of the government already. So in the whole Europe, there is, but you asked for Germany especially, right? Yes. Yeah, okay. For Germany, there is so far, we call it the wall. So officially there is a wall and no one wants to make a coalition with the AfD. But that's the official thing. And we analyzed regional and local initiatives, and in communities there has been several occasions of cooperation already in the last years, And there has been a debate starting in several regional party organizations, especially Christian Democrats in East Germany. They debate what happens after next regional elections and why shouldn't we make a coalition with the AfD. We are against immigrants. We are not against any immigrant, but we are against bad immigrants. So we could find a compromise. And the basic idea, that's what we discussed already, is that we might control, we might moderate them. We might make a coalition and they would be moderate and then everything would work out. That's what I debated with Sherry Berman at APSA. She had exactly the same position and said, no, you're completely not right. You should live in East Germany and you see that you can't moderate them. They don't want to be moderated. They have become more and more extreme and they want to change the political system and abolish democracy. Bavaria had been some kind of, no one right of the CSU in Bavaria, no party right of them, but it's only in Bavaria. And this hasn't worked, as we've seen in the last regional elections, but this is your home place, so you could tell us more, where the AfD had only 13% in Bavaria, but we had a very right-wing also Free Citizens, which are, well, not very right-wing, but moderate right-wing also. They had 18, something like 18%, and the CSU is quite from moderates to right-wing within the Christian Democrats. So it didn't really help. So the coalitional potential, we are very worried about that. And numerous studies in Europe has shown that as far as you start engaging with right-wing populists / right-wing extremists, you make them, we call it salonfähig, you make them acceptable. You show to the voters, to the audience, yeah, you legitimize them. It's okay to talk with them. It's okay to cooperate with them. So in the end, why shouldn't I vote for them? I vote for the original. If now we have a switch in migration politics, and the Social Democrats, Christian Democrats, liberals try to stop immigration, refugees more. And if you use the language, the positions of the right-wing populists, many people say, voters say, well, now they took over the positions of AfD, so why shouldn't I vote for AfD? I vote for the original and not the copy. That's as simply as that. And exactly, back to the source. And that's an interesting thing. Just to mention also France, and we have the same now in the Netherlands. We see that the right-wing populists like Geert Wilders or Marine Le Pen, they started a kind of in France, they call it de-demonization. That means she moderated some of the positions in order to be more acceptable for bigger part of voters. And that's what Wilders also did. He said in campaigning in the Netherlands, yeah, we are against Muslims. His official party program means closing down all mosques in banning scarves and things like that. But he said, that's not important at the moment. We should concentrate on refugees and immigration at the moment, and on economic problems. We will talk later about other things. Yeah, that is scary. I think that's scary. Sherry Berman said, oh, they are moderated. And so, no, I feel scared living in the region and with these kind of strategic moves. And it worked. And as we saw, Geert Wilders won the election in the Netherlands. If there would have been elections in France at the moment, Marine Le Pen would be the next president. Macron is so unpopular. Yeah, and with this strategy, for example, she threw out her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, out of the party. He was really anti-Semitic, really hardcore against Muslims and anything. He was against gay and things like that. She threw him out, changed the party name from Front National, which was very militant, to Rassemblement National, which means the assembly, right? And not the front. It's the assembly, more moderate. Yeah, more metaphoric, moderate. And now the Rassemblement National is officially not anymore against same-sex marriage, gay rights. they don't talk about that. They are in favor of women's rights, also because that's then anti-Muslim a little bit, and so they moderate, and they are not openly anti-Semitic anymore and things like that. Instead, Marine Le Pen, she just recently went to a rally in favor of support of Jews in France. And there was a big debate in France whether an anti-Semitic party, but she said, I'm not anti-Semitic anymore. So she moderated many positions. We do not know if it's a real change or if it's just a strategy. That's, Kurt Weyland with a strategic approach always says it doesn't matter what they say, it matters what they do. And as far as they're in the opposition, we only know what they say. That's why we analyze what they do when they are in power, because then we see what happens. And what happened is wherever they are in power, the democratic quality diminished, like in Poland or Hungary. But in France, in the Netherlands, we're very worried. And in East German regions, they could only get into a coalition, which might be possible on a regional level, but the regional government controls police, judiciary, education, and media. These are the competences of regional governments in Germany. And this is also quite scary when you think of a government, let's say interior minister controlling police from Alternative for Germany. That's not a very good idea, maybe. But we will see, and we are observing that. And maybe last thing, I know I asked you, maybe we can discuss that then tonight, how to bring back the people back to democracy again. Yeah, how can we do that? I mean, as I said, in the end, I think we have lost a big part of the population, which is clearly anti-democratic. Numerous surveys in Germany and in other European countries show that we have a big part of population which is against democracy, in favor of a strong party, against any immigrants, etc. But we don't know exactly how many of the supporters and voters of the right-wing populists are clearly programmatic, convinced voters, and how many are those people who are just frustrated and have fear and might be won again back by democratic parties. The problem is, just to end it, we just recently made a study in my region, in the northeast, in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, northeast of Germany, about media use and political culture. And the people don't read any newspapers anymore. They don't watch television news anymore. They're in their bubble with Telegram and other WhatsApp groups, and that's where they get their information. And how can you reach out to the people in order to...
Telegram use is big there? More than WhatsApp?
In certain groups, no. Within certain groups, especially right-wing groups, they use Telegram, yeah. WhatsApp is more... Yeah, WhatsApp is more a private thing so far. They start to establish it also as for political discourse, but so far WhatsApp in Germany is used only for private means. I talk with my children via WhatsApp, but not for political reasons. But you have these Telegram groups, you have these special YouTube channels where they tell themselves that Germany is not a democracy anymore. There's no freedom of media. Everything is manipulated, and the state wants to exchange the population, these conspiracy theories. That's why they support immigration, and they want to abolish a German tribe, Germanic blood, let's say, from the world. And these things are mixed. And how do you reach out to people who don't read a newspaper anymore? Of course, they don't read a book or hardly anyone reads books or journal articles we write. We have to be honest. But that's why I'm very often in the news, in the newspapers, but hardly anyone reads it anymore. How do you get the people back to democracy? I really don't know. That's what we discuss. Pardon?
This ship has sailed.
Yeah. But that's exactly what our regional politicians want to know from us, and said, I don't know.
At least in terms of communication, I think there's a way back, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it. Should we establish a YouTube channel? Could we reach out as you did here?
Yeah.
Can we could we get to the people? Should we start a WhatsApp channel or a podcast or whatever?
Pulverized, right?
Yeah.
I think the communication scene changed a lot. That's one of the most important changes
Yeah.
in recent years. Before you had this big media operations that concentrated information, delivered information every day.
Filtered information.
I know, very much so, yeah. But now it's not like that anymore.
Okay. So, thank you, Wolfgang. Thank you, Christoph. I think that we are very glad that you were talk today. Obrigado a todo mundo. Então, que nós encerramos aqui o nosso debate. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigado por estar aqui. Excelente.